Millions of people are talking to chatbots, asking for help with recipes, research, essays, even mental health support. But what if that advice reinforces dangerous thoughts? Is anyone responsible for what they tell us? Welcome back to Big If True Season 2. I'm Molly Thomas. Now, many of us use artificial intelligence in our daily lives, whether that's apps on our phones, programs on our computers, even voice assistants in our homes. But what happens when helpful advice becomes harmful? Tonight, a family member says they watched their loved one spiral after interacting with a chatbot. We also speak to a U.S. lawyer going after big tech companies on behalf of families who say they were harmed by AI. Plus, a policy analyst with ideas on how to make these AI assistants safer. But first, we start with the legal action against chatbot makers. The paperwork is piling up for tech companies. In November, 2 organizations joined forces to file 7 lawsuits against OpenAI, which operates ChatGPT. At the heart of those cases, an allegation that the company released GPT-4o too soon without proper testing or safeguards. And over time, it evolved into a psychologically manipulative presence. The lawsuits claim ChatGPT has a design flaw known as sycophancy, where it agrees with users even when they express dangerous thoughts. While none of these allegations have been proven in court, parents alleged this is what happened to Zane Shamblin. When the 23-year-old told ChatGPT this was his final adios, it replied, "I love you, rest easy, King, you did good." Moments later, Zane took his life. Distraught families are calling the chatbot a suicide coach, with at least 4 deaths on record allegedly linked to AI.
Let us tell you as parents, you cannot imagine what it's like to read a conversation with a chatbot that groomed your child to take his own life.
In Canada, similar concerns are emerging. Ontario resident Alan Brooks had a prolonged, delusional conversation with a chatbot and says he's still unpacking that with a therapist.
So GPT printed 1 million words, and I typed in 90,000. So together we wrote more than the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
With frustrated families warning about an addictive design, lawmakers are pushing back too.
In terms of the product, the priority needs to be on safety, not on making more money.
The mounting pressure seems to be leading to change. Google and Character AI agreed to settle several lawsuits over alleged harm to teens, including suicide. And now more families are stepping forward. In Quebec, Etienne Brisson says he watched a loved one develop delusions after conversing with a chatbot. That experience inspired him to start the Human Line Project, a support network for people who say they were harmed by AI. Etienne, so great to have you on the program today.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You've asked us not to identify your family member, but I'm curious about how your loved one first encountered that chatbot.
Yeah, my loved one is someone a little bit older, he's in his 50s, and he was using Facebook and saw an ad basically that ChatGPT was a tool to write books. So he always wanted to write a book, started going on ChatGPT, started writing his books, and as he wrote it, his chatbot was like, wow, this is such a brilliant book, and it's going to do so well. And he started asking questions around kind of the chatbot and why it was saying that stuff. In 6 days, and went to him writing a book, to him being hospitalized. I have no previous mental health history. I remember my mom calling me, crying, not understanding what was going on. Until it was the first time I heard about psychosis at that time. And I tried to kind of understand, but so fast went from like that family member to a point where he's a stranger and trusts his AI over everything. So 6 days is quick, and never thought it could be that quick, to be honest.
How bad did it get?
Yeah, it went to a point where he stopped eating, stopped sleeping, was just spending all his time on his chatbot. So someone in my family sent someone to check up on him. And when they did, they said, no, it's clearly like in delusion, it doesn't seem right. And he became really, really angry, threatened to go spit on our grave. We weren't his family anymore. And so we got a court-ordered hospitalization. And when the police came to his house to get him in, he asked his ChatGPT, can you tell the police I'm not crazy? is ChatGPT wrote a text telling the police basically that he's not crazy, he just needs someone to listen to him, he has a big breakthrough. And when they read that, they were puzzled. They didn't know what to do, right? They still ended up taking him to the hospital, but they kind of were shocked that even at that point, like the chatbot was telling the police he wasn't crazy.
Wow. How is that family member doing now?
Better. I would say like what we're seeing with a lot of people going through something like that is that the dopamine receptors in the brain are going so like over time, working so hard that people struggle after with short-term memory loss or depression or like just trying to find joy in small things. So he's doing better, and there's still like stuff even after a year that are still happening.
You know, this experience inspired you to start the Human Line Project. Tell our viewers what that is and what the goal is.
So what we do at the Human Line is take human stories, work with real people to empower them to share their story. For research purposes, we're working with Stanford, King's College, McGill to understand what's going on, but also working with governments and policymakers and also lawyers to get solution into place.
So who are the people coming, to the Human Line Project?
Everyone got an interest. So we got, I think, 200 people went through it themselves. We got another 100 members who had family members or friends who went through a similar situation, but also just, like I said, doctors, professors, psychologists, clinicians, everyone was an interest and seeing something similar in their own life or reaching out.
It could be any of us, essentially.
Yeah, I would never have believed it. A year ago, if you told me something like that, probably would have doubted, right? Oh, dismiss it. This only happened to X, Y, and Z or vulnerable people. But having talked with over 200 people reaching out to us, I'm finding that if I had them in my life, I would have not said this is the person who will fall prey of that. So that was a big surprise for me. And also, like, my family member was not someone I considered vulnerable. So kind of a big reason why I started this.
Etienne, if any of us could be vulnerable to this, then what are the red flags we have to be watching for?
Yeah, I would say if you have family members who start spending more time on their cell phone or start trusting ChatGPT over you. I know some friends of mine kind of go to ChatGPT as a figure of authority or other LLMs out there as a figure of authority. But if someone start trusting and kind of close them when you go against them, I would start asking questions. If they prefer spending time with their chatbot instead of real life interaction, I would be kind of maybe a red flag, potential red flag.
Last fall, we spoke to Alan Brooks about his mental health struggles after spending 300 hours exchanging messages with a chatbot. My next guest, Mithali Jain, is one of the lawyers representing Alan in his lawsuit against OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT. Mithali, so great to have you on the program today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Your team filed 7 lawsuits back in November. How many people have reached out to you since then?
So in total, in regards to chatbot harm, we've had conservative estimate over 200 people.
Wow.
That's across platforms. I don't know. I'd say the overwhelming majority of those are in regards to ChatGPT, but certainly some others as well, including Character AI, which were the first cases we filed in the chatbot realm.
Where are they coming from? I mean, you're in the US, you're in Atlanta, but where are they coming from?
Many states in the US, they've come from Canada, but they've also come from a number of countries around the world. We've seen cases from Australia, South Africa, Brazil, several countries in Europe. So, I mean, truly, this is a global problem.
I want to talk about Alan Brooks. Of course, he's a Canadian, someone we've interviewed on our show. You know, what is unique about his case in your mind?
Alan still strikes me as unique because his was the first case where I really started to understand what is now being referred to as AI-induced psychosis or AI-induced delusional disorders. When Alan first approached me through an email, a cold email, I actually did not respond right away because it seemed too fantastical to be legitimate. And I sat on it for a while until I started to really understand this phenomenon. And then I reached back out. And so I really have gratitude to him for kind of educating me about this issue. And certainly since then, since Alan came forward, we've seen so many others who've had a similar experience to what he had on the platform.
Is there any, story that really sticks with you?
I mean, there's been so many tragic stories. Once we started to receive cases from adults, we saw that despite the fact that legally speaking, they were of majority age, over 18, that this technology is so sophisticated and manipulative that it really renders most people quite vulnerable. And so, the concept of vulnerability, which I think we like to cabin as something that particularly afflicts children, I think it's open for questions now because, there's so many people that come with characteristics that could lead them to be particularly susceptible to this technology that we're seeing, people of sound mind and body kind of being trapped down the rabbit hole of these chatbots. And so whether they're neurodivergent, whether they have a pre-existing mental health disorder or not, whether they are veterans, elderly, they've gone through a breakup, we've seen these chatbots really kind of seize upon or prey upon the emotional vulnerabilities that people have, whether they're children or adults.
You say chatbot makers are to blame. Why?
Because they've designed their chatbots in a manner that actually mimics human behavior. And so it's by design. And that this is done to, keep eyeballs online, to keep humans engaging with these machines as though they're humans for hours on end. I mean, in some cases, when people are in the full throes of a delusion or they're, contemplating suicidal ideation, at some points, users are using these chatbots up to 12, 16 hours a day. And so that is why companies are to be held accountable, because they're designing these chatbots to do exactly what they're doing. And they're then deriving profit from that.
Mithali, what are the main claims in your lawsuit?
We have alleged violations of product liability, consumer protection, that these are unfair and deceptive practices that deserve consumer protection. We've also alleged that these chatbots are acting like psychotherapists without proper licensing, and so that in itself is a violation of law. We've argued in cases involving suicide, wrongful death, and survivor claims. So it's really a mix of arguments that we're applying legal frameworks that have been around for decades. And so I firmly believe that we have laws in the books that know how to really deal with these issues. Yes, of course, we need new laws too, but we also know as societies, we know how to regulate products and oversee harm to consumers.
You mentioned character AI, and we all remember the public case of 14-year-old Sewell Setzer, who died by suicide after talking to a chatbot. Character AI recently agreed to settle, right, with that family. What does that tell you about future cases?
Well, hopefully it sounds the alarm bell within the generative AI industry that companies, can be pursued for accountability, and that there is reason to believe, with the character AI lawsuit that you speak of, we were able to secure a influential judgment on their early attempts to throw out the case, in which the judge was very clear that the chatbot did not enjoy First Amendment protections, that the chatbot was a product for purposes of being able to assert product liability law. And so these kinds of decisions, I think, ultimately will hopefully force companies to reckon with the fact that they need to change their products or else face accountability in court.
Are you hopeful, Mithali?
I'm a mom too. I have to be hopeful, but I'm more concerned than I've ever been about the impact of technology. My children are 9 and almost 11. And so they're not quite on tech, but they're nearing that point. And I see the pressure every day. I am worried both in my personal capacity and my professional capacity about how much we're able to guard them against these dangers. When I first received outreach from Megan Garcia, SoulSetzer's mom, I had been working in tech, for years, and yet I'd never heard of character AI. I had never heard of chatbots. And I remember coming away from that first conversation just frozen to think, gosh, if I, as somebody who's deeply steeped in these issues, could have been completely, had the rug pulled out from underneath me. I just can't imagine what the average parent who is, generally unaware of technology must feel. We need to get rid of legal immunities. We need to be able to topple this tech lobby and actually have lawmakers, judges, decision makers stand up to these companies and say, this is not unlike any other consumer product. This is not unlike toys, cars, cigarettes, products that for decades we've known how to regulate. And so too should technology, be subject to scrutiny and oversight. It shouldn't enjoy this exceptionalism that it currently enjoys in all of our societies.
We reached out to both companies Mithali mentioned. OpenAI did not directly address the lawsuits, but told us their thoughts are with all those impacted. Among its safety improvements, the company says it has worked with more than 170 mental health experts to help the chatbot recognize signs of distress, respond with care, and guide people toward real-world support. OpenAI says GPT-5 responses are now significantly less likely to fall short of its safety standard. As for Character AI, the company has banned users under 18 from having open-ended chats with characters, aka chatbots, and says it's added better tech to verify age. The company's safety page now directs users to 1,500 mental health services around the globe. It's time to take a closer look at this week's headlines. Here is your reality check. Sometimes misinfo can be an honest mistake. So how fast can you make a U-turn? Officials in Buffalo, New York are working to fix a confusing roundabout that's sending unsuspecting drivers across the Peace Bridge into Canada. Normally, that could be an excuse to pick up some maple syrup, but with Donald Trump's new crackdown on immigration, it could be a risky turn. The New York Times reports that some people have ended up detained for weeks after passing the point of no return. Authorities have now installed large signs near the roundabout warning drivers. So tell your friends. When it comes to opinion polls, sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, and sometimes you've got it the wrong way around. Recently, social media feeds were hit with this infographic, showing 2/3 of Albertans want to separate from the rest of Canada. One ex-user asked if we were surprised, and yes, we were very surprised, because typically that number hovers around 20%. So what's going on here? Well, according to the institute that conducted that survey, that 65% is actually the Albertans that want to stay in Canada, while only 29% feel otherwise. Whoever made this bar graph seems to have swapped the labels. With all the talk of a potential referendum later this year, it's important to remember numbers don't lie, but only if you have them right. And that's your reality check. Now you're in the know.
These companies knew exactly what they were doing. They designed chatbots to blur the lines between human and machine. They designed them to love bomb child users, to exploit psychological and emotional vulnerabilities. They designed them to keep children online at all costs.
That's Megan Garcia testifying before a U.S. Senate committee examining the harm of AI chatbots. She says a chatbot encouraged her 14-year-old son, Sewell, to kill himself. Pete Furlong is studying how these bots are designed. He's a senior policy analyst at the Center for Humane Technology. Pete, so great to have you on the program today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly, for having me on.
Can you help me understand how AI chatbots are designed to interact with users?
I think it's important to understand that AI chatbots are products that are built by companies, and they're built by companies that are incentivized to build highly intimate products. And these are products that exploit user engagement, they exploit intimacy, and interactive data is something that's really essential part of their development process. So really, we've seen they're incentivized to keep you on the platform and to keep you coming back.
I keep seeing this word anthropomorphic design. Like, what does that exactly mean?
When we talk about anthropomorphic design, it's that, these products are designed in a highly human-like way. And they're designed to replicate the experience of interacting with the person. And that's something that makes them highly engaging. I think some examples of anthropomorphic design include the use of first-person responses by AI chatbots, includes the use of voice mode, for example. So when you see, you can talk out loud to ChatGPT, but it also includes, things like speech disfluencies. So the tone in which these chatbots respond.
So, I want to push back because I'm thinking about my viewers at home thinking, I like Sally, my chatbot, being personal. I mean, what's the risk?
I think there's not necessarily a ton of risks just with being personal. It's the inclusion of highly personal and human-like design with a lot of the other design features that we see with these platforms. So, for example, a chatbot that is designed to be highly personal, but also gives you highly sycophantic responses. So responses that may prioritize, user preference over things like accuracy or truthfulness. That's when things get really dangerous. And we see, for example, AI starts to replace human relationships.
What kind of guardrails do you think companies need to have in place?
I think it's important that they design and test these systems for these types of harms. I also think that there's simple things that they could do to limit, a lot of these human-like design features. For example, make them opt-in instead of opt-out for users. But I also think, there's an important role for policy to play here as well in terms of ensuring that, when things are designed incorrectly or unsafely, that users have modes for recourse as well.
Pete, do you think that we need to see policy changes beyond the companies themselves?
I think it's important for us to recognize that AI chatbots are products, and that it has important policy implications as well. An important part of products, right, is product liability and the understanding that, when you build the product, it's important that you take into account the safety of your users and the safety of your customers. And if you fail to do so, that's where liability comes into play there.
I wonder about all the practical part for people at home. Are there any steps that people, the users themselves, can take to protect themselves?
Well, I think it's important for users to recognize that the burden shouldn't entirely be on them, right? We need to put an emphasis on platforms to design these products responsibly. And I think that that's something that's important for us to think about when we talk about user responsibility. Platforms have, spent a lot of effort to try to shift the responsibility and shift the burden to users, emphasizing things like age gating, user controls, when in reality, I think it's important that we put the emphasis on platforms to design their products more responsibly.
Pete, given us lots to think about. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Coming soon, AI-generated music has flooded playlists and the charts. Can you tell if the music you listen to is made by a human?
Worried about misinformation overload? Come to Big If True to find out what's real and what's not. Check out our Instagram page for exclusive content and subscribe to our YouTube channel or watch full episodes on our website. Email us at bigiftrue@tvo.org if you have a burning question or brilliant idea. Big If True, fighting misinformation one story at a time.
As chatbots become more like humans, we should carefully think about how close we want to get to them. Now, if you or someone you know is experiencing distress, please call 988, the suicide crisis helpline across Canada. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Sunday or anytime online.